Now, I don't want to depress you or make you more anxious, but these are some of the characteristics that you mentioned about, and this comes from various articles and things I read about the Z generation, but you talked about psychological issues, you talked about anxiety, depression, loneliness, mental care, drug use, suicide, hopelessness, so what I hope, that, again, thank you for confirming what most of the stuff you said and more came along, is already out there. So here's basically the some of the data. You probably don't need to know it, but here we go. Ages 18 to 25, that's vast majority of you. David, are you over 25?
No.
Okay, you're good. So we see, roughly since 2008, here is the increase in terms of the various anxiety issues that occur. So 139% increase from roughly 2008 to 2020, it looks like. And then it goes on, you know, and the older you get, the less you have the anxiety, because you get, you know, forgetful and you can't remember what you're afraid of and these kind of things. So forth. Now this is another statistic I found about undergraduates. Now undergraduates would be basically 21, 22 to 18, somewhere so in that range. But again, here we have, you know, anxiety, depression, just what you guys are talking about, ADHD, bipolar, anorexia, blah, blah, blah. But you can see up here at the top that anxiety and depression are pretty much going off the charts. And so you have to ask yourself, why? Yes?
Something I always consider with this is it not just because we have the words to describe it and to recognize it.
Say that again, sorry.
So is it that anxiety and depression are increasing? Probably. But isn't it also that we're just, that we have the words to label it and describe it?
Yeah. Probably both, a little bit of both. Yeah, we have Becca, right? Yeah, it's probably both. We're more accurate in describing it, and finding it and identifying it, and it's becoming more. Before in the old days, if you were depressed or anxious, you hid it. You didn't tell, you know, that was not cool to do. But now it's kind of out, and everybody's going sometimes over it. Hey, and so these might be inflated a bit, but yeah, good point. Thank you.
I would say that it's probably both, because if it was purely based on having the words to describe it, you would see the same amount of increase in millennials and Gen X at least. But since it's higher in Gen Z, I feel like it's probably also undergoing an issue.
Good.
I agree with that.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Yeah, good. Okay. Now, I'm going to be playing a number of clips, a lot of clips. And as I said earlier, I like, fun is my favorite word, fun. So hopefully you'll find out. I want you to write down this guy's name, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Anybody heard of Dr. Peterson? Has anybody heard of him? Yeah. Okay, got some, okay. In my opinion, I've been following Dr. Peterson now for maybe 5 years or so, and I've listened to hundreds? Is that an exaggeration? A lot of hours of his. He actually put one of his classes online. He's got a bunch on YouTube, and he's a professor was a professor at the University of Toronto. He's a clinical psychologist, a PhD. He is an intellectual, and this is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. In my opinion, Dr. Peterson is the prophetic voice to the postmodern world. He's incredibly bright, well-read, and again, he's published over 150 papers as a clinical psychologist, so he knows what he's talking about. And I think that what he has to say is, as far as I can tell until today, probably the most accurate representation of what we need to hear today. Now, the fun part about Peterson, like I said, I've watched him long enough, people say, well, is he a Christian, is he a believer? And my opinion, he is. But here's what's so fun about him, is that he really knows how to play the media. So a reporter will come up to him and say, Dr. Peterson, do you believe in God? And he says, I live my life as though there is a God. And the person goes, yeah, okay. They walk away. And when I first heard that, I thought, that is so brilliant. Because what happens is, guess what? The reporter doesn't know what the word believe means. The word believe means to live your life in accordance with. It has nothing to do with intellectual, grasping an idea or something and then saying, oh yeah, I believe that. No, that's the intellectual part. True belief is when you start living your life in accordance with what you think is true. So that is what it means to believe. So when Peterson is asked, do you believe in God? He's telling them, I believe in God, but they don't know it because he's not using, they don't know what the word belief means. And so, his message, I think, is something that we all need to hear. So I'm going to have a fair number of clips with Peterson in it. And this is at Oxford Union, some kind of a forum at Oxford. So, you want to play that, John? Get out of the way here.
Life is essentially suffering, and I believe that to be a fundamental truth. But perhaps not the most fundamental truth, because I think the most fundamental truth is that despite the fact that life is suffering, people can transcend that. And partly the way they transcend that is by pursuing things of value. And so that if there is no value proposition at hand, then you have no meaning to justify the difficult conditions of your life. And that's brutally difficult for people. Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear any how. And you see, and I've certainly seen this as a clinical practitioner, that people who have no purpose in their life are embittered by the difficulties of their life. And they become first bitter, and then resentful, and then revengeful, and then cruel. And there's plenty of places to go past cruel. That's just where you start if you're really on a downhill path.
Okay, so Jordan was talking about this idea that life is suffering. That is true. We will suffer. We do suffer. We are suffering. And the only thing that gets it through us is if we have meaning in our life, and somebody was talking about, in its generation, trying to find meaning. If we have meaning in our life and we have value in our life, then it helps us overcome, endure the suffering that we go through on a regular basis. Now, I'll give you a minute to look at this. It may take a while to get it. What in the world is God up to, for Christ's sake? Play on words. So in English, I'm sorry if it doesn't come across in other languages, but we have to ask ourselves, what is God up to? What's He doing? How is this working out that in His creation, we're at a point now where I would say it's fairly critical. And where's God in this? Why is He allowing this? Is there something going on that we need to know about? Now, there's a really interesting scripture in Chronicles, and it's in Chronicles 12:32. Now, it says, and the sons of Issachar were men who knew their times and were able to tell Israel what to do. Okay? The sons of Issachar were men who knew the times. They knew what was going on so that they could tell or advise Israel what they should do. Well, I think guys like Peterson and others are men of Issachar. And there's a lot of women here too, and involved in that, it's not just men. But there are people that know the times, they know what's going on, and then they can come and they can advise the believers, hey, here's what's going on, and here's what we need to do. I think Peterson's one of those voices. I think there's a number of voices out there that are speaking into it. We need to listen so we then can know, and in terms of what to do, in my opinion, that means how do we orient ourselves to what is coming at us? Because we need to know, right? We can't just stick our head in the sand and go, oh, this is horrible, this is terrible, this, and not be aware of what's going on. And because as soon as we're aware of what's going on, then we have an opportunity to respond to it, right? And push in instead of just getting overwhelmed and washed away. When you know what's coming and you look and you can see it, then you can prepare yourself, and when it comes, you're ready for it. So that's what, in my opinion, that's basically what this week is about. So, part of it is trying to explain what are the times. Speaking of time, where we have, do we take a break at 11? 11, okay, got it, all right, so, 2 minutes. No.
11:15.
So,
11:15.
Yeah.
11:15.
oh, 11:15, okay, good. So I'm gonna do my best to explain to you, in my opinion, could be wrong, but I think it's mostly right, as to where are we? Where are we today in terms of postmodernism? Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, because I want to spend the vast majority on the time on the other side of it is, how do we orient ourselves? That's important, but also you got to know what you're orienting yourself towards, or about, or why. So, what we have here, we talked about the sort of the history of truth. How do you find truth? And then it's morphed into the present era that we find ourselves in. There were 4 streams of thought. Now, this postmodernism is a little tricky. It's a little difficult to understand. We love our dear French brothers. We love our French friends, our French fries. We love them. We love them. But these guys were good. So there were 3 French philosophers that basically came together in the mid-60s, early 70s, somewhere along there, between 60 and 70, let's say, 1960 and 70. And they came up with the idea of what we now call postmodern philosophy. But they didn't none of us stand on our own, right? We're all standing on somebody else's shoulders, the people that went before us. And so the four streams that came in to influence the 3 French philosophers were these 4 streams here. So it was Marx. Karl Marx was the root of it, and then out of it is what was called the Frankfurt School, which was basically just a reinterpretation of Marx. They didn't think Marx went far enough. And then we have a guy named Ludwig Wittgenstein, an Austrian philosopher, very interesting guy, who came up with the idea, and we'll talk more about it, but his idea was, and he was a philosopher of language, and language and communication. That was what he did most of. And he was the one that said, it's not what somebody writes that is where you get meaning. It's whoever the person is that reads it. That's the true meaning. So it doesn't matter what the person who's writing it, the author of it, well, he can write anything. That's not what it means. What it means is, if I read it and I think it means this, then it means that to me. So you have multiple possibilities of interpretation of any text. And in Christianity, that got a little crazy because a lot of liberal theologians came up with the higher criticism, as they called it, of it. Biblical text can mean anything. Depends what you read into it. If you read into it, then that's what it means. So the thing is, and this will come to, multiple possibilities of everything. So if somebody thinks they're a cat, hey, they're a cat. In the discussion. Where'd it come from? Well, Wittgenstein was the root of it. And then you have the postmodern philosophers, this is Jacques Derrida, Jean-Francois Lyotard, and Michel Foucault. We'll talk about them more later. 3 French philosophers. That close enough?
Yeah. The last one, yes.
Was it?
The last one you said, Foucault, it was good pronunciation, but I didn't know them, and I don't know them.
Okay. So those are the postmodern philosophers, and then you have the progressives. Here's the interesting thing about progressives. 100 years ago, well, and we'll hopefully tie this. 100 years ago, we were at the place of tremendous change. And the progressives are people who say, we want the world to be a better place. Well, everybody's a progressive, right? Who wants more suffering? Who wants more misery? Who wants more natural disaster? Nobody does. So on this line of what is the idea of a progressive, we're all progressives. Now the question is, how do you do it? What do you think it means by a world being a better place? And so that's where the progressive guys, because it's the progressives that implement the philosophy, let's put it that way. The philosophers themselves, I may be mistaken, I may miss somebody, I haven't read anywhere where the philosopher was actually the one that did it. He just came up with the idea, they just came up with the idea, and somebody else, usually it's about 60 years later, begins to implement the philosophy. Okay? So, setting up here. So,